disagreements in your pre-show notes, but perhaps some of you who didn't include any in your pre-show notes or want to raise them now, any disagreements that anybody has, either with maybe you've seen something Jake said or something I've said that you'd like to touch on, we can start there.
I like to address the disagreements as they happen. Personally, I can't really think about things.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah.
What you got?
Hand teacher. I just met you, so
Jake.
Jake.
Yep.
I would say the majority of the shows that I've seen has been with you and Andrew Bryan, and I have to say that there's a lot wrong with what's going on with women, but you guys tilt really hard towards it being like the women being the primary catalyst for the issues that are going on in the dating world, when it's really both. Like, there's really a lot of things that are going wrong with both genders, and like just blaming, pointing fingers, it's just boring, like, let's just figure it out.
You want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I don't think I actually say that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't actually say it's mostly women's fault when it comes to the whole, just the fuckery of the dating landscape, although it probably is. So I'm prepared to actually have the conversation.
What makes you think that they say that it's mostly women? What gives you that impression?
Well, because the majority of the panelists are women, and admittedly, some are very unfortunate in their thought processes, but I don't see men at this table who are also dumb and make dumb choices. It seems to just be like primarily the women.
What do you think are some of the dumb choices that men make? What are some of those things you're talking about?
Oh, there's so many. Well, I would say, for one, doom scrolling Instagram for what they think the woman that they want, listening to old people tell them that relationships and marriage aren't worth it, spending too much time on devices, no social skills, not being able to communicate, read body language, actually interact, and I think certain antiquated ideas about how this whole thing works with couples. Like, I think that there's a lot of, on both sides, there's just some really outrageous expectations that I think we need to bring down to the reality.
First few, you've got doom scrolling, you've got unable to communicate, read body language, these sorts of things. When do the people on this show espouse those sorts of behaviors, that they're correct?
No, I'm not. That's not what you asked me. You asked me what are some of the problems the men are having.
But I'm making a bigger point. You said that they're primarily blaming women, which would mean that they're enabling the bad behavior of men. At which point have they enabled bad behavior of men or encouraged it?
It's more of like an example, like exemplary, so it's implied. So there's things that are actually said, and then there's things that are implied. So when the men come on, it seems to be that they're going after the women. I haven't really seen them go after men with the same energy, except for there was like two guys who were in the industry, and they kind of ripped them.
That would be a good example.
Yeah. So, but for the most part, it's mainly the women and directing what men think is wrong with women.
Do you think maybe it's because with the women they invite a broader cross-section of the population of women, so they get all different perspectives, whereas the men tend to, generally speaking, think a reasonably similar way? If you get like a guy like myself, Andrew Wilson, Charlie Kirk, guys like this, we all have a reasonable, with a lot of disagreements, we have a reasonably similar worldview, whereas with the girls there's a lot more to pick apart because you guys are all so different. There's like 10 of you. So you think there's just more subject matter there?
I don't know. I never thought about that.
Yeah, because, I mean, there are a lot of issues with guys and girls. I think with guys, one of the biggest issues is overconsumption of internet. Like you said, doom scrolling, lack of motivation, ambition, but there's a lot of societal factors that encourage this. There's also a lot with women, but I think it's just brought to the forefront more because there's so many of you.
So you're saying that like more men are suffering from these things, so it's like pretty much the same. But wouldn't it be kind of interesting and good if more men would come to podcasts like this and express what
I
their
think that
frustrations
generally
are to an actual
speaking,
woman?
men in their own social circles like hash these things out with each other. There's not really much of a need for it because the world tells us these sorts of things. If Brian was doing something absurd, I'd just tell him, hey, Brian, you're doing something crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But generally with women, I think you guys tend to be much less accountable to each other and to yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like we see women who will say, I'm a 10, I'm a 10, I'm a 10. I'm the best thing since sliced bread. But with guys, we just don't act like that because we really can't afford to, or else the world would just punch us in the face.
So men are conditioned to not have confidence?
That's not confidence, that's delusion. If it's false, what you're saying, then it's delusion.
Okay.
It's a bit different because like guys, like my closest friends are my two brothers, and the level of competitiveness that we have with each other is, you guys would probably cry if you heard some of the conversations that we had with each other because it's just so honest and accountable. So I can't really get away
two
with
older
it.
brothers, and
Yeah.
even though I am a woman, I do understand.
Yeah, 100%. But there's certain, and also just in, this is something Jordan Peterson says a lot, if you guys ever listen to him, that men tend to operate within a structure where there's physical consequences if it gets to a certain point. So if I say something to a guy, it can escalate to a point where there's going to be physical consequences. So generally we tend to regulate our relationships, which regulates ourselves and our level of delusion and how rude we can be, etc. But women, unfortunately, don't really have the same thing. So it's interesting when the opinions are expressed.
I have a question, like going back on it. Maybe I feel like there's a bunch of ways you can interpret, like rate yourself 1 out of 10. I feel like there's many ways you can interpret it. And, you know, there's a way, what do you think, like walking down the street, like what would you view me as versus like what do I see myself as? Because I would rate myself like higher because I have confidence within myself to dress how I want. I'm growing with my career. Like I do those things. So I view myself as like I'm expressing how I'd like to. But maybe you can interpret the question of like, because I don't think that's delusion, you know, like expressing yourself how you want and all of those things and viewing that as like a 10. But let's say...
I think that the kind of the definition of delusion is if you view yourself in a way that's not compatible with how the rest of the world sees you.
Well,
because we have to regulate in society what is real and what isn't. And then when somebody sees themselves as a 10 and in societally, objectively speaking, there may be a 6 or a 7 or somewhere probably in the middle of the bell curve, then that would be delusion. Now, there's nothing wrong with having self-confidence and self-respect. That's a fantastic thing, and having intrinsic dignity. But I think that if you are actually a confident person, then you're confident enough to say that, you know, I'm a 6 or a 7, or I'm not the best thing ever. Because a 10 is a remarkable feat. If you ever see a 10, you look 3 times.
Correct. I could see that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously everyone has different types and all of these things that could contribute to like, you know, I might be like that person's a 10 and you might be like that person I wouldn't even say hi to, you know, and obviously those things. And
there's definitely subjective interpretations, and you know,
it's a very hard question.
I might like Eastern European girls, and another guy might like Latin girls. We might see them very different, but generally speaking, when we're looking at rating ourselves, it's on a global sort of scale. Like, and we can get a reasonably accurate estimate of where we think we are.
I could see that.
But also, this is just another thing as to why it's more interesting when girls flesh out their proper worldviews, is because you guys get a lot more male attention. Like if you're a pretty girl and you have an Instagram and you post some nice photos, you're going to get a lot of attention from guys.
Of course.
But us, I mean, I've got a big YouTube channel that's like nearly 700,000 subscribers. I only ever get men who inbox me, you know, guys who say, I like what you do. So, we don't have this constant flattery where we're, oh my God.
I don't disagree with you on any of that. I mean, the men viewing your stuff, you know, like you probably, I haven't seen you, I'm sorry, but you probably go on as like a male role model to these men, you know, like women, in my opinion, like role models, like I want to look at women as my role models. Like I can respect a man and his opinion, and like I do all the time. I'm like, I watch male YouTubers, I love Ben Shapiro, I love Brett Cooper, and I look up to both, but, you know, that's probably why. But that can be an issue that with men, you know, that they're giving women, and like she said, doom scrolling and all of those things.
Yeah, well, this is another big thing. I mentioned porn before, and things that you mentioned were all great points as well.
I want to get back
but also,
on the
I'd say I'd say simping is another big thing. It's like something that's heavily, heavily discouraged on this show is going to OnlyFans pages, paying for that sort of thing,
Right.
and giving unrequited attention to women. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I wanted to say that you might personally not have a lot of women coming to your Instagram page because of your platform and what it is that you're shooting for, but look at all these muscle guys who are like advertising how they can do 100 pull-ups and 60,000 squats. You see all the girls, hey baby, hey, like they get so much attention.
Talking to the mic.
They get so much attention. I mean, it's to say that men don't ever get that kind of attention.
Do you think
is
if we put
a little bit of a
it
stretch.
on a linear scale like this, and we showed all of the most attractive women, we'll say the top 5% of women, compared to the 5% most attractive men, do you think that there'd be an imbalance in who gets more attention?
You know what? These days, I would have to say no. I'd say maybe 1 or 2% skewed more to the women, but I'd say it'd be pretty even.
I'd say
do.
that the top 5% of women would just get a constant influx of absolute just simping diarrhea going their way.
The men get
all
that
day,
too.
every day.
Throwing
of guys.
panties left and right.
You're talking
Maybe if
about
you're
the
if you're
top
like a rock star in the
5%,
1970s, but
you don't even have to be the top 5%. I know this.
Mm.
And you get a lot of attention all the time.
I would say that
Essentially
the amount
regardless.
of attention that a pretty girl gets on Instagram you could liken that maybe to Elvis Presley in his prime, with the kind of attention that he would get, because it was global. You had lots of different women from all around the world every time. I don't think everyone ever sees, but lots of different women all around the world. But with girls, some of these girls have hundreds of thousands, millions of followers, and it's global. They've got this fan base. Like the Buddha never had this sort of a cult following, or any of these historical figures. Gandhi never had this much
Are you
of a
kidding me?
following.
What about Prison Bay? Remember Prison Bay?
What's Prison Bay? That might be a bit beyond my time.
Prison Bay was literally a guy who was in prison, but took a mugshot, very good looking.
I think
He exploded. Now he is
yeah,
an
the
international
model guy.
model, and he's dating an heiress. So
He's dating who? Who's he dating?
some heiress, so the last I checked. I mean, he left his family. Apparently, he was married at the time. So he left his wife and kids because the internet and the whole world told him that he was fine. And so he decided to live
Yeah.
his dream. And
Can I just say, just quick little show of hands, does anybody here agree that the top 5% of men would get the same amount of attention as the top 5%
No.
of women?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No,
You think that they would?
Yes,
The top 5% of like good-looking men on the internet?
for sure.
Do you think they'd get the same amount of inboxes and they'd get the same amount of like just unrequited attention from random girls?
yeah.
I think that's pretty delusional, if I'm honest.
I think that they get the same amount of attention. Like if I'm telling a friend, like, oh my God, Justin Bieber, you know what I mean? But I'm not sliding into Justin Bieber's DMs. Like I don't, you know what I mean? So I think like
I think it's
secretly,
it's pretty quantifiable though, because if you just look at OnlyFans, who are the top 5% of creators? Who are the top 50%? You struggle to find a guy, and maybe a few male.
I
porn
think it's
stars.
also like socially predictable that men always look and scroll and comment, where like when you go on to even like a better looking guy's page and you scroll through comments, it's almost like cringy when women
It is.
Yeah.
It's
it
not
is.
very
Like,
socially
the different
accepted.
social acceptance.
because
for sure.
like
Yeah.
because men are hunters, so like they're always the ones going after women, whereas like when a woman does it, it's very like distasteful.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the best point that could be made in regard to this, is that women do it behind closed doors. They talk with their girlfriends,
Right.
oh, this guy's so hot.
Or
but it's-
directly like to the man, but not publicly.
Yeah,
like if
right.
if you're talking to somebody, then you'll like tell them they're handsome or
Yeah.
whatever, but you're not going to do it publicly.
I actually think the percentage would be not even close,
Yeah, I would say so too.
honestly.
I approach people publicly all the time, like on Instagram.
But you're one out of how many women?
that's why it's not an even score. She's saying.
Wait, so I do want to come back to what you're saying. And I'm no idea what's going on with the TTS, not working. So I apologize, guys. We'll try to get it figured out. So your argument was what, essentially? You're saying that men and women, when it comes to their difficulty interacting with the opposite sex, is about equivalent, or what was your argument?
No. He was talking about in terms of like attention and attraction on Instagram. He was asking me if he thought that the attention that the women got was equal to the men. And I'd say that with the women, maybe there's a few percentage more, but pretty much it's half and half.
I think he said that in response to an
so
original.
the-
I think that he said that in response to original point you made. What was your original point? I'd like to address it.
Oh,
The original
it's been
critique
too
was
long.
that
What
she
was
thinks that we like the podcast tends to skew more towards
No.
blaming women for the dating problems.
No. So you were making another argument, essentially kind of saying dating is about easy. It's like easier for men, or what was it?
No, I didn't say that.
Can I add something to it?
No. I want to get back
I
to
think
her
the question.
conversation.
I think what her argument was saying how there men have issues too. Like at the beginning, she was giving examples of what men do wrong in relationships, and she's also expressing that you guys
No.
kind of
Okay, I think, please just allow me to get this through. So I think you were saying something along the lines of the men get about equivalent romantic and sexual attention that women get.
I was talking specifically about Instagram, though.
Are you sure?
Yes.
No,
It was before
broader.
that.
I used Instagram as an example.
I'm pretty sure Jake was using that in response to something you said. So just what's your actual position?
Yeah,
that
my actual-
men and women receive about equivalent sexual and romantic attention?
No, absolutely not.
Am
That's not
I
my
being
position.
gaslit here, chat?
No.
Can somebody in the chat
So-
please tell me what she said?
Earlier, she was saying that they're essentially, not that men aren't being held accountable, but because it's mostly women here, y'all address the issues with women, but we don't hear so much the other side of it. And I wanted to interject and say a lot of people say the 70% of divorces are initiated by women, but when you take out certain statistics, and I think this is probably where you were going along with this, if you take out abuse, if you take out infidelity, the 70% isn't exactly 70-30. It changes.
Depends what you mean by abuse, though, because if you look at what the Psychological Association says about abuse,
Yeah.
it's like it can be things like gaslighting. So Brian could divorce
Yeah.
me if we were gaslighting him about the chat, or anything like that. You know, it could,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of different things. Emotional abuse is a big umbrella term.
But
so-
even if you took that 23% and you just like cut that in half, because it was like 23% was because of abuse, cut that in half because or even a third, because like you said, you can say abuse is whatever. It still changes the statistics a little bit. So I think it's a little exaggerated, and I think it kind of honestly panders to men who don't want to take accountability. I think accountability is an issue like across the board, more so with women, but there's also a lot of men who also lack accountability.
Well, I mean, the statistics would still be far in favour of women breaking up the families and breaking up divorces. But I mean, it also blows out to like 90% when you look at college-educated women.
Yeah, the higher
It's-
education level, yeah.
It's much higher. So I think that statistic in itself says a lot about the dynamics in a marriage and what
I think
works
it's
and what doesn't
indoctrination in the
in the
education
university
system. Yep.
And also in terms of hypergamy, because college-educated women who earn a lot of money and have very successful careers are much more likely to look elsewhere if they feel the man isn't above them. If they feel the man is below or equal, much more
agree.
likely to look elsewhere.
I think men tend to need I don't think this is controversial, men need a father figure. And I think that men tend to look up to people, and men that look up to you, like I like some of the views, like I could kind of get an understanding when you relate it to like maybe Charlie Kirk or something. And then men tend to copy like people that they like. So men online might see that person. Like there's a percentage of men that look up to you, kind of follow your sort of guidelines when it comes to dating. And then there's the men that see other guys like treating women horribly and all of those things. So that could play a factor also in like how men, like that's an issue. Like
Yeah, I
the
think
men
that you're talking
promote
about
that.
like guys who have certain role models online, and the role
Correct.
models might not be conducive to what's productive in life. Is that
Right.
what you're saying? Yeah, but I think that particularly with this podcast, it gets a bad rap in that regard. That it somehow doesn't sort of cater to that message. But if you look at a guy like Andrew, who's on all the time, he's got 5 kids and he's happily married and he's contributing to sort of the apparatus that is of the healthy society. You got guys like Charlie Kirk, he's married with kids and
Right.
they're having these conversations. So back to your critique about the podcast, I would ask, what exactly are the messages that you think that are being told on this podcast, or how do you think men are being fed a message that lacks accountability, if you will?
Well, I would say that men do tend to go harder. They'll be blunt, There's definitely a shorter amount of time to tell it straight than beat around the bush, right? However, there's also this element of, feminism, women are, all 304s, and, they don't want to get married anymore, they don't want to have children, and, all of these,
Do you think that's
types
true,
of
or do you
things.
think that's false?
I would say that there is some truth to those things, but it's not all of them.
Do you think? I don't think we'd ever really talk in a monolith when we speak about these things. We would never say all women this or that. But the statistics bear out these facts that people are getting married less. Women are much less incentivized these days to get married and to pair bond. And that's why I think this podcast is particularly interesting. But it gets written off a lot because what we're talking about here is dating, and people might think, oh, dating.
I do have
whatever.
some good news though.
But just 1 second. When we're talking about dating, that's pair bonding. This is like the seeds of what then creates a flower, which is a family, and then hopefully a thriving jungle, which is a society of happy families and the nuclear family and this and that. So this is why
Kevin donated $18.
Nearly. No, this is why this podcast, I find it very fascinating and interesting, is because we're kind of like reaching around in the dark and wading through the dark and trying to figure out the dating market, which is where we pair bond and what eventually creates a healthy society. So it's why it can be very chaotic at times.
Well, the good news is that divorce is actually down 18%.
Since?
They did a study, the census did one, it was way back in 2016. It came up on my feed. It said, red pill was wrong about divorce. And so it was a whole
Doesn't sound contrived
collage.
at all.
No, but then I double-checked because they did attach a link to the census. And so I was able to look at the report myself. And divorces are down. And get this, it's because millennials saw their Gen X boomer parents getting divorced all over the place, and they said they didn't want to do that. Yes, there are less marriages
I'd be very interested to see the
happening.
numbers of this, because I think
Yeah.
that what you're probably talking about, I would hesitate to guess, but I'm going to guess anyway, is that you're talking about new marriages on a shorter time scale, and it's not over
Yes,
the
we're talking
lifespan
about
of a
new
marriage.
marriage, and they're saying that these millennial marriages are lasting beyond 5 years.
Millennials are only like 31.
No, millennials starts at 1980.
38, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
38,
millennial starts at 1980.
Yeah. So then,
Divorces could be down though because less people are getting married. Is it like based on a percentage of you take 10 people?
Yeah.
Like
Less-
that's a big factor too. Less people getting married, obviously less people getting divorced.
And who's to say they're not going to get divorced in the next few years?
yeah,
Yeah, I
divorces
was
tend
gonna
to
say,
happen. Yeah.
aren't we comparing it to studies with like much more longevity than what we're talking about now? We're talking about just 5 years in comparison to studies of like 30 plus years.
Exactly.
A consensus from 2016 is almost a decade, so I don't really know how relevant that is to now, because I'm pretty sure that during COVID, we had the highest spike of divorces, and that was only 3 years ago. So I don't really know how accurate that is. So I
Actually,
would-
marriages went up during COVID.
Yo,
Can you ask the chat if they are hearing this?
I don't think I can see the chat. Can I?
No, but can you just ask them?
Hey, chat, can you guys hear the TTS?
Can you guys, because they might hear it, but maybe we're not.
Brian wants to know if the chat can hear the TTS. He's reading it now. Should we get back into it, Brian?
They're saying no. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Where were we? You were saying that marriages were down in COVID. Is that what I heard?
No, I think that if I'm correct, they were up.
There wasn't
that
much
people
else-
were
much else to
yes,
do,
wasn't
was
much
there?
else to do, right?
And I
so
don't think
a
you
lot of
could
people
go in and get a divorce either.
Yeah.
and there was a lot
That's
of
so true.
things that were held up. But here's what I think it is. Honestly, I think that there are less people getting married, but the people who are getting married are being very strategic and intentional about it. They're not going in willy-nilly, and so they mean it more. And they're also older. So the average marriage now for women is 30, and so they're older. They've put in some time for what they feel they need or whatever they were missing, so they can make these relationships work. And honestly, like those are going to be like. At some point, we're going to have two different classes.
There's a lot
in
of
America.
there's a lot of data that indicates that the later people get married, the worse off they are.
That's not what the new data says.
Because if you have and there's plenty of studies that show that women who get into their 30s and they've had a bunch of sexual experience and partners, and then they eventually get married, they're much more likely to get divorced. So I think that's actually
But
not
you
a good
added
thing.
a
And then
variable.
also, when
you
you're
just assume that the women, because they get to 30,
once
that
again,
they're
we
going
have to
be.
speak in generalities. A woman who's 30 is more likely to have more experience than a woman who's 21.
Can I interrupt you real
Go
quick?
for it.
I think also less people are going through the court system too. Like that can include like divorce, because people
Gray
are very
divorces.
much not like. That's the statistics probably go off of the court system and who's going to court to file for a divorce, but there's probably a bigger percentage of people that aren't trusting like the government or like don't want to pay because that's expensive. Like you got people that can't afford to go to court to get divorced, so it's just a mutual
Killer of
understanding.
Cereal donated
But those are all
$200.
unknowns, though, right? Like
Let's
there's,
have a
those
banger
aren't
of a
things we
show.
can know. Right?
Welcome
So the
back,
only thing we
Crackle
can know
Snake.
Well, we
is
can't
what
know that
Welcome,
either.
Panic.
It kind of all plays
Before
a
they
heads
do have
start
some
rolling
reports of
from
like
trolling,
gray divorces,
let's get
and that's
those
usually
most
with older
embarrassing
people,
data and your
where they just
carnal
don't
knowledge
actually get
stories,
divorced, but they
please.
live separate
Sing.
lives. So yes, there is incidents of that.
You mentioned that that people are not getting into marriages as quickly, but there was a study. It was only, I think, a few thousand, like 2,000 men that they did, and they said most of them, and they were in long-term marriages. Most of them knew within, I think, 6 to 8 months whether they wanted to get married. Like men know
I can see that.
pretty quickly if they want to get married. They know if they see the traits that they want in a woman. And I don't have like a big following on Facebook. It's a small following, but it's mostly married couples. And a majority of them, whenever I made a reel about that specific topic, a lot of people got mad at me for it. But a lot of the married couples that have been married 20, 30, 40 years were commenting, and they're like, yeah, we got married after a month. We got married after 3 months. So
I think that's a healthy thing. And I mean, generally speaking, I can only really speak for myself, but I know straight away at least like 80-90% of what I need to know about a woman from dating her for like a week.
yeah.
And then after that, it's sort of just weeding out the little things and hoping she doesn't turn into a total psychopath. But yeah.
A lot of people don't date for marriage. You know, when you do date for marriage, which I think is an amazing thing. Like, I wouldn't want to get in a relationship.
I
unless
dated for marriage both times.
Well, what I was saying is that when you date for marriage, it's a different conversation. You know,
Yeah.
usually like in today's world, people are hooking up the first time. They don't really know. They like wait and hear one thing, or it's considered like, I've been on dates where someone's like, sorry to trauma dump. But if you're dating for marriage, that's not trauma dumping. It's getting to know somebody.
A man said to you, sorry to trauma dump.
I've heard that multiple times.
I bet that turned you on big time.
Sorry to trauma dump, and then starts crying. Like that's also the difference. Like, you know, dating for marriage, day one, you're like, this is me, this is where I grew up, this is my family situation, I do this for work. But some people are like, am I talking too much? Am I doing this? Is this wrong? Because it's not like a norm. Especially, I think I'm younger than most of the panel so I have a different perspective of like people my age that are in the dating
But
scene.
how did they approach it? Were they like, these are all my problems, start crying? Or were they like, hey, this is my baggage, just so you know?
No, it was like, this happened to me. I feel like it's different when they say, this is my baggage, I'm
feminine.
working on it.
I think that this is just a big problem these days with the conditioning we have around mental illness and the conditioning we have around a lot of the just basically what's seen as normal, what's seen as regular, and guys are feeding into this as well. And guys should be taught responsibility, and they should be taught how to be stoic and how to deal with their own problems. that unfortunately now, a lot of the time, these guys are being taught that the more messed up you are, the better. The more autism and this and that, and I have blue hair and I'm like neurodiverse or whatever they call themselves these
It's a
days.
lot of women,
The
I'd
norm-
say.
Oh, women are.
Women
yeah,
are
this
worse
is,
with
it's
that.
rough. It's rough with
100%
women, but
worse
I'm-
with women.
Unfortunately, it's also seeped into the male population. So, yeah, unfortunately, you guys have to
The
deal with
percentage
this
on
sort of
that is not equal because
Yeah.
women are usually I worked in treatment, like rehabs and treatments, and a lot of the percentage of people have actual autism where they don't understand completely like what it means to be a man or a woman, so they're like they get lost. Or it's women that, like, when you go by they them, I'm not saying this for everyone, not saying whatever, a lot of that is women that don't want to associate with being a female because of trauma. They're like, no one's going to target me
Well, that's a
psychologically.
big problem with the whole transgender movement is that, like, a lot of these kids end up being gay when they're older,
Right.
like the young guys. A lot of women, you guys will know that when you're a teenage girl, you have a lot of body image issues
Right.
and a lot of hormones happening, you're growing breasts and all these sorts of things.
That goes back
And-
with the role model thing too. People are like looking up to people on YouTube that have blue hair and crying about things, or the laziness, like bed loathing, I think is a thing right now. Like taking
Bed loathing?
Bed rotting.
bed rotting. Like, I'm gonna lay in bed all day for mental health and just like be depressed, and that's reframing things to sound good. And then you see that online, you're like, I don't want to just lay in bed all day and let someone else do everything for me.
Interesting.
I definitely agree. I think there's a really big problem online with people romanticizing mental illness and
Yes.
eating disorders especially as well. Like
Yeah.
people like to promote that kind of content like it's cute to hurt
I feel like
yourself.
with young women, it used to be anorexia, but now it's transgenderism. Have you guys seen a shift?
Definitely.
And like the
Yeah.
body
Yeah.
positivity, it's like